It's kind of crazy to me how the Mission Impossible series continues to use practicality with its stunts and its action, and how it's always shot on location. They always have cars and vehicles blowing up and doing all these amazing, incredible stunts for audiences to flock to and see, especially with Tom Cruise doing all of it. And that's usually been the memo for Mission Impossible. And then you kind of go back to how it all began, and you always kind of think to yourself, as much as there's probably some of that, it's a lot lighter than what we would get as the series progresses. So it's kind of funny to think that almost 30 years later, you kind of go back and you watch something like this, and you think to yourself, this is actually a lot tamer than how it's gotten. And I don't know if I would say I want it this way. I kind of like with the trajectory of where things are going, but that's usually the progress with a franchise. Mission Impossible is directed by Brian De Palma with a screenplay by David Koepp and Robert Towne and a story by David Koepp and Steven Zaillian. The film stars Tom Cruise, Jon Voight, Henry Sissoner, Emmanuelle Béart, Jean Reno, Ving Rhames, Kristin Scott Thomas, and Vanessa Redgrave. According to IMDb's plot synopsis, an American agent under false suspicion of disloyalty must discover and expose the real spy without the help of his organization. I am now deciding to cover the Mission Impossible series a little bit earlier, because usually whenever a movie would come out in like a week or so, I usually kind of like to cover the movies, but because there's 8 of these films in this franchise, and we are getting the latest one in May, I figured I will be at the very least covering 2 films within a month, covering at the very least most of the movies leading up to 8th film. It's crazy to think that before the Mission Impossible that we now know today with Tom Cruise, everyone knows this franchise, and he is so ingrained into it that most people kind of tend to forget there was a TV series from the 1960s to 1973. Though it had a brief revival from 1988 to 1990, the original series was a staple of the 60s without a doubt. If you look at that series, is very much heavily involving the Cold War and all the political elements that was going on in the 60s. 30 years later, from when the original series debuted in 66, Brian De Palma would take a crack at making a film for the series, and Tom Cruise would be its lead. And Tom Cruise, yes, he did Top Gun, and it was an action movie. However, he was not really seen as action man leading material, so this was his first attempt of trying to do so. When I saw the film, I really was lost because of what was going on in the movie, and we'll get to positives and negatives in a little bit. Simply put, I was just young. I mean, you're talking to somebody who tried to watch Hunt for Red October when he was young, and I was completely kind of lost and confused throughout most of that entire movie. But now I have found new love for that film, and so did this movie when I rewatched it a little bit years later and have now an appreciation for the film. And rewatching it, I still enjoy this a lot. I really found myself really digging this film, especially for time and the era in which filmmaking was. I still have a blast with it. Aside from the issues that definitely are on display in this movie, here are the positives that I have. The performances. They're all exciting. Tom Cruise is charming and stern as Ethan Hunt. And Cruise blends well at being lean man material and an action star. Because like I said, he did do Top Gun. But again, a movie that really emphasized more of the jets, and the jets were more of the stars than Tom Cruise was, if you ask me. Besides that, he has been kind of known for doing like comedies and dramas. This was his first foray into being action man lead material. Kind of similar to how Robert Downey Jr. was tasked with being the head of the MCU. And for Tom Cruise to pull this off, he pulls it off so well in this movie, because I truly bought this guy as being not only charming, but really a stern, determined leader. He is somebody who is willing to go hell and back just to get the job done. No matter what it is, he's willing to do it. And Tom Cruise, he is dedicated to this role, and he actually gives a really good performance as Ethan Hunt, and it makes me care about him. That is something that I always want for my main characters, is to give me some depth, especially for a spy, because you can easily say that this is like a James Bond type of character, but really, he's different, and I like that. He's more human, if you will, than James Bond ever was. The direction is steady. Director Brian De Palma brings his thrilling style and making it feel old school in a way that I think a lot of films at the time were trying to kind of go back to in a way, like old school type of filmmaking. This was for a whole new generation to discover what Mission Impossible was, and for everyone to now fall in love with this series because of this movie. And it's all thanks to really Brian De Palma and his talent as a director of making scenes and dialogue as well as really action sequences really stand out. The action is suspenseful. When any action sequence happens, the suspense and thrills are always heightened. And after almost 30 years, they are still entertaining. I still think about the action sequences in this movie even after watching it. Like the vault scene, that is amazing. That is easily one of the most iconic moments in not only just the series, but just in filmmaking because of how much that scene heightens your suspense, your feelings and worries for Ethan in that situation. But then you also have the end fight, which is also entertaining, although it has its few issues. There is a sense of danger and thrills, and I really do respect the fact that Brian De Palma managed to pull off that element very well. The music is stellar. Composer Danny Elfman. Yes, people, Danny Elfman. Nightmare Before Christmas, Spider-Man. I mean, this guy is a master as a composer, but really makes a score that mixes both the original themes from the original series and adding a fresh style to it that makes it kind of feel like a rebreather. The music element of this series continues to strive, and that is all because of what Danny Elfman had laid the groundwork for this movie with regards to its score. And to this day, even though it is from the original series, I still really think of the score that Elfman had brought to that first movie, and it is something that still continues on long after the film had already debuted. Cinematography is solid. Cinematographer Stephen H. Burmer frames an intense and focused film that keeps it engaging. He shoots some of the most iconic scenes in the series. Like I said, the vault scene, how it's all framed and how it all is well shot and well within the feeling of suspense. You also have your signature Brian De Palma shots, which are sometimes Dutch angles or rather focused close-ups and blurry kind of background. That's usually always the case in a lot of Brian De Palma's movies, but really the film is shot well even after all these years, and I think it still is terrifically beautiful and well framed. The production is amazing. The amount of effort, time, and passion that was put into this movie is amazing because with a budget of $80 million, it's impressive and it's all well put together. With an $80 million budget, people, this is Mission Impossible. Mission Impossible nowadays is kind of now leaning towards like $200 to $300 million. Back then, this was $80 million. Time, passion that was put into this project is felt throughout this entire movie, and it's all because they were able to make sure that all of the equipment looked amazing and all the sets and even the mask trick that is now considered an iconic part of the series and something that I don't think anybody gets sick and tired of. Nobody gets sick and tired of those masks being pulled off. They still use them and they still find ways to still use them in creative ways. And it's all because of how this series really put effort into the spy elements, but also making sure that the heighten is on par with it. The pacing runtime is on point. Every scene feels quick and to the point. There is no dilly-dallying, no slowing down moments. This movie keeps on going. It does not know when to take a break, and honestly, for a movie that has a premise for what it is, it fits perfectly. With a runtime of 1 hour and 50 minutes, it's just right. For a movie like this, I could have never asked this to be longer than what it is. I am glad that it is perfectly under to almost close to 2 hours. Almost close to that, but you know what? For what it's worth, right where it needs to be. As much as this movie manages to hold up, there are some few issues that I do see with this movie that holds it back. Here are the negatives. The story. First off, I don't think this is a bad story, but I will say the story is convoluted. It just feels like there are so many twists and turns that it just kind of becomes tangled up in them. It's almost like if you try to pull one thing from this, I feel like this plot could go all over the place. And that's why I think that with the elements that are in this movie, I just don't think you can pull this apart and be like, all right, if they could just solve this, that'll work. I think this is a plot where it's like all these pieces kind of have to be there in order for this plot to work. And I'm not saying like I said, I'm not saying this plot is terrible because it's not, but I can understand how convoluted it can get and how extra it can be with how the movie goes along. The visuals don't hold up. Of course, since this is the 90s, the visuals just have not aged well. And while I understand that so many people will say, well, Zach, then that must mean something like Jurassic Park can't hold up. True, there are certain shots in that movie that don't age super well, but I'll give credit to that movie that blends a lot of practicality and visual effects and blends it pretty nicely still that holds up fairly well to this day. But this movie, there's just moments of green screen usage and the visual effects for some of the gadgets that, yeah, they're just don't hold up as well anymore. And once it gets to the end, people, we know Mission Impossible for going over the top and zany with its climaxes, as well as having practicality on set locations and Tom Cruise doing his Tom Cruise things. But the end of this movie, with it being pretty much a big CGI finale, it may have been impressive back then, but now it just feels so out of place, but also it just does not age as much anymore. And while I do think it is thrilling, it's thrilling in the sense of the music helping it, and I'm going along with it for what it is, but I cannot deny it just does not hold up anymore. The villain is uneventful, even though this is the first villain in series, which I guess I could say I can give a pass. But the problem is his explanation as to like what he's really doing doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I'm not going to give away what it is because it is a plot twist, but even still, when you actually stop to think about his explanation as to why he's evil, it's like, okay, but that's it? That's really it? That's all you got? By the end of the movie, he doesn't really put that much of a fight. Like, he does scuffle a bit with Ethan, but by the end, I mean, he's pretty easy, and it just kind of leads to a very little bit of an anticlimactic end for him. And it's like, okay, well, that just happened. I feel like there could have been a better way for this villain to put up a more visceral and very hard nail biting fight, but in the end, all you get is just really like, all right, that's solved. It's impressive on how most of this movie holds up pretty well and has a lasting effect. Tom Cruise proved that he can be an action star, and to this day, I will agree with a lot of people when they say that Tom Cruise is possibly the last action star of today. And yeah, because of movies like this, he has cemented his legacy as being one of the last few action stars to still be working in the film industry and continuing to bring in blockbusters like this. And people get excited for them. People get really excited to see Tom Cruise doing something crazy, something insane, and people eat it up. Besides the convoluted plot and outdated visuals and confusing villain, it's still a good first outing for a series that went on and keeps on going to this day. This film laid the groundwork for a franchise to still kept alive, and it's because of the efforts of Tom Cruise and Brian De Palma, production team, all of it coming together with passion and heart. It showed that this franchise could breathe new life into the action genre, or in this case, the spy genre. I'm going to give Mission Impossible a 7 out of 10. I think this is a pretty good movie. I still had a fun time watching this. For a movie that is now nearing 30 years old, it's quite entertaining still. I'm still surprised, and I hope it never loses that effect. And to this day, the series is all the more grateful for what this first movie did, because for how this movie could have gone, it ended up on the right foot. So now I'll be giving my review for Mission Impossible 2, and then soon a week I will be doing my review for Love Hurts. So yes, look forward to those reviews and other movie TV show reviews coming soon.